Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into Godfrey Higgins's Anacalypsis.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, Book 8,
Okay.
where he goes deep into the origins of the Jewish Pentateuch.
The Pentateuch, okay.
Are you ready for some surprising connections
Oh, yeah.
between Jewish traditions and ancient cultures, especially those found in India?
Yeah, this should be fascinating. Anacalypsis from the 19th century.
Yeah.
It really delves into the shared roots of different religions. And Higgins,
Yeah.
he was quite the unconventional thinker, wasn't he?
Absolutely. He really pushes the boundaries in Book 8,
Right.
suggesting potential links between Jewish traditions and ancient Indian culture.
Okay.
And he starts by looking at the Jewish people themselves,
Right.
emphasizing their distinct identity and their history of conflict with neighboring nations.
Yeah, and he kind of questions, if the traditional explanation that they're God's chosen people
Yeah.
really fully accounts for this uniqueness.
Right.
It's as if he's saying, there's more to this story than we've been told.
Exactly. And then he throws out this incredibly bold idea.
Yeah.
What if the Jewish people didn't originate in the Middle East, like traditionally thought, but in a region of India,
Oh, wow.
possibly near modern-day Mathura?
That is a radical idea.
Right.
That would rewrite, our entire understanding of Jewish history and identity.
Yeah.
I mean, where does he even get this idea from?
Well, he points to these similar place names found in both India and the regions that are associated with the ancient Israelites,
Okay.
suggesting possible migration patterns.
Okay.
For example, he mentions that Mathura was formerly known as Maturia,
Materia.
a name that echoes familiar places in the biblical narrative, right?
Okay.
He also brings up the presence of Black Jews in India, who he sees as potential remnants of early Jewish sects.
Black Jews are interesting,
Yeah.
especially when Higgins notes that some of these groups don't even have the Pentateuch,
Yeah.
suggesting they could even predate Moses.
Right.
Imagine Jewish communities in India before the traditional time of the giving of the Torah.
It really does flip the script,
Raises so many questions about how those beliefs actually developed and spread.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
And he doesn't stop there.
Right.
He goes on to explore linguistics,
Linguistics.
and he notices Sanskrit influences in Latin and Greek,
Okay.
and he proposes that ancient Hebrew shares a common root with these languages and various Indian languages,
Okay.
including those spoken by the Afghans.
So he's essentially building this case for deep connections between cultures that at first glance seem worlds apart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's like a linguistic detective,
Right.
tracing the evolution of language to uncover these hidden relationships.
It's important to remember that language isn't static, right?
Right.
It evolves over time, borrowing words and grammatical structures from other languages, especially when those cultures are interacting with each other.
Right.
So Higgins uses these linguistic connections as evidence to support this idea of a shared cultural ancestry between these groups.
Yeah. And then he gets even more specific,
Okay.
and he brings in the Yadus,
The Yadus.
an ancient Indian people who, according to Hindu tradition, were involved in founding numerous cities.
Okay.
And he suggests that the name Judah might actually come from this group.
Oh, wow. That's a fascinating connection.
Right.
He's not just suggesting geographic links, but, potential genealogical ones as well.
Exactly.
If Judah comes from Yadus, it implies a much deeper connection than we ever imagined.
It makes you wonder what other connections we might be missing if we're only looking through this narrow lens of history.
Right.
But Higgins doesn't just draw connections.
Okay.
He also challenges traditional interpretations of biblical stories.
Okay.
For instance, he suggests that the story of Abraham being commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac
Right.
could be an allegory representing a conflict between opposing religious sects.
He specifically identifies these sects as followers of Linga worship versus those who followed Yoni worship.
Right.
And it's important to understand that these terms refer to ancient symbols that represent male and female principles in Hinduism.
Right.
The Linga represents the phallus and the Yoni, the womb.
Right.
So Higgins is arguing that this biblical story might actually be a symbolic representation of a historical clash between these different belief systems.
So he's encouraging us to look beyond the literal interpretation of these ancient texts.
Right.
And consider the possibility of deeper symbolic meanings.
It's an approach that we can apply to many other aspects of history and religion, right?
Absolutely.
The stories we inherit are often filtered through the perspectives of those who actually recorded them.
Right.
So by questioning those perspectives and looking for alternative interpretations,
Yeah.
we can gain a richer and more nuanced understanding of the past.
And he applies the same critical lens to the recurring presence of the name Solomon or Solimi.
Okay.
Not just in the Middle East, but also in parts of India.
Okay.
He points to the Tugte Suleiman.
Tugte Suleiman.
Or Throne of Solomon being found in several locations, including Kashmir and Persia.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Right.
The fact that we see Solomon or Solmi appearing in these places that are far beyond the traditional area of influence of the biblical King Solomon
Right.
suggests something much more profound.
Yeah.
Higgins argues that it points to a wider cultural or symbolic meaning associated with that name, as if Solomon represents an idea,
Yeah.
an ideal of wisdom or kingship that went beyond, geographic boundaries and resonated with different cultures.
Right, and resonated across time as well.
Yeah.
So we're seeing Solomon popping up in these unexpected places.
Yeah.
But wasn't Solomon a real person, a historical figure?
Right.
How does Higgins reconcile this with the wider symbolic meaning?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And, Higgins doesn't shy away from it. He suggests that historical figures can become intertwined with symbolic meanings over time.
Right.
Their stories become vessels for ideas and ideals
Okay.
that resonate across cultures.
Okay.
Think about how the name Socrates represents not just the man, but an entire philosophical approach.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
So Solomon could represent this broader concept of wisdom and kingship,
Exactly.
adopted and adapted by different cultures.
And this concept of shared cultural and symbolic elements leads Higgins to explore pandeism,
Pandeism.
the idea of a universal god.
Okay.
He connects this to figures like Pandion, a mythical king found in both Indian and Greek traditions.
Hold on. Pandeism.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a bit?
Sorry?
I'm not sure I fully get what that means.
Pandeism essentially proposes that God is both the creator of the universe and identical with it, suggesting that the divine is like immanent in the natural world,
Okay.
not separate from it.
Okay.
It's different from pantheism, which simply equates God with nature,
Okay.
and deism, which sees God as a creator who doesn't intervene in the world after setting it in motion.
Okay, so how does this relate to Pandion and Higgins's overall argument?
Well, Higgins sees figures like Pandion as potentially embodying this concept of a universal God, or at least representing a set of shared spiritual concepts that existed across these different ancient cultures.
Okay.
He sees these echoes and recurring themes as evidence of a deeper fundamental connection between different religious traditions.
It's like he's piecing together this massive puzzle,
Right.
finding these shared pieces across cultures,
Yeah.
and suggesting that they once fit together
Right.
in a grander, more unified system of belief.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
And this concept of interconnectedness,
Yeah.
challenges this traditional view of religions evolving in isolation.
Right.
Higgins is suggesting a more fluid and dynamic model
Right.
where ideas flow back and forth, influencing and shaping each other over time.
It makes you realize that maybe our understanding of religious history is too compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to look for the bridges,
The commonality.
the commonalities, instead of focusing only on the differences.
Exactly. Right.
And this brings us back to Higgins's analysis of the Black Jews of India.
Right.
He argues that they,
Especially those groups without the Pentateuch.
particularly those without the Pentateuch,
Right.
could represent a pre-Mosaic form of Judaism,
Right.
meaning that Jewish beliefs and practices existed and evolved in India
Yeah.
before the traditional time frame for the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai.
That's a bold claim.
It is.
Is there any evidence beyond their lack of the Pentateuch to support that?
Well, Higgins relies heavily on these linguistic connections and the shared cultural practices.
Right.
But he admits that more research is definitely needed.
Right.
He sees these groups as this missing piece of the puzzle,
Yeah.
potentially holding the key to understanding the development of those early Jewish beliefs.
Hmm.
Imagine if we could trace those beliefs all the way back to their roots in India.
Right.
How might that change our understanding of Judaism?
It's mind-boggling to think about.
It is. It really challenges us to rethink what we thought we knew and be open to these alternative narratives.
It does.
And it makes you wonder if the Black Jews represent such an early branch of Judaism.
Yeah.
How does that change our understanding of the Samaritans? They're often seen as a separate group.
Right. The Samaritans are typically seen as a distinct religious group separate from mainstream Judaism.
Right.
But Higgins throws another curveball.
Right.
He argues that they actually represent a branch of the ancient Israelites
Oh.
who simply maintained different religious practices.
Okay.
Centered around Mount Gerizim instead of Jerusalem.
So not a completely separate group, but just a variation within that broader spectrum of ancient Israelite beliefs.
Exactly.
Okay.
Higgins suggests that the idea of the lost tribes of Israel might be a misinterpretation instead of disappearing.
Yeah.
These tribes might have been absorbed into other groups or developed distinct practices over time, much like the Samaritans he describes.
So it's like he's looking at the whole picture.
Right. The entire tapestry of ancient beliefs and practices and seeing connections that others have missed.
That's a great way to summarize his approach.
Right.
He's not focusing on individual threads, but how they all intertwine to form this complex and interconnected whole.
Right.
And this holistic perspective challenges us to reconsider how we approach the study of religion and history.
This deep dive has been packed with information.
It has.
From India to the Middle East.
Yeah.
We've explored linguistic links, challenged traditional narratives, and uncovered potential symbolic meanings.
It's been quite a journey. And remember, we're only scratching the surface of Higgins' Anacalypsis.
Yeah.
But even this brief exploration reveals how much there is to uncover when we dare to question these established narratives and delve deeper into the connections between cultures.
It makes you wonder what other hidden connections we might find.
Right.
If we keep digging, keep questioning, and keep our minds open to new possibilities.
That's the beauty of exploration, isn't it?
Yeah. It's about embracing the unknown.
Right.
Challenging assumptions. And discovering new perspectives.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what Higgins encourages us to do.
So we've got Solomon popping up in these unexpected places.
Yeah.
But wasn't Solomon an actual historical figure?
Right.
How does Higgins square that with, this broader symbolic meaning?
Well, that's a good question. And Higgins, he doesn't shy away from it at all.
Right.
He suggests that over time, historical figures can kind of become intertwined with these symbolic meanings.
Right.
And their stories, they become vessels for these, ideas and ideals that end up resonating across different cultures.
Okay.
Kind of like how Socrates represents not just, the man, but a whole philosophical approach.
I see. So Solomon could represent this idea of wisdom and kingship.
Exactly.
That was adopted and adapted by different cultures.
Exactly. And this concept of shared cultural and symbolic elements leads Higgins to explore pandeism.
Pandeism.
The idea of a universal God.
Okay.
He connects this to figures like Pandion.
Okay.
Who is a mythical king found in both Indian and Greek traditions.
Like pandeism. Can you break that down a bit? I'm not sure I completely understand what that is.
Sure. Pandeism basically proposes that God is both the creator of the universe and is identical with it, suggesting that the divine is like immanent within the natural world, not separate from it.
Okay.
It's different from pantheism, which equates God with nature, and deism, which sees God as this creator who doesn't really intervene in the world after setting it in motion.
Okay, so how does that relate to Pandion and Higgins's overall argument here?
Well, Higgins sees figures like Pandion as embodying this idea of a universal God, or at least representing like a shared set of spiritual concepts that existed across these ancient cultures.
Okay.
He sees these echoes and recurring themes as evidence of a deeper, more fundamental connection between all these different religious traditions.
It's like he's putting together a giant puzzle.
Exactly.
Finding all these shared pieces across cultures and then saying, hey, they all fit together in this grander, more unified system of belief.
And this idea of interconnectedness challenges this traditional view of religions evolving in isolation.
Right.
Higgins is suggesting this more fluid, dynamic model where ideas are flowing back and forth, influencing and shaping each other over time.
Makes you realize that maybe our understanding of religious history is a little too compartmentalized. Maybe we need to look for the bridges, the commonalities.
The commonalities, exactly.
Instead of just focusing on the differences.
Yeah, and this brings us back to Higgins's analysis of the Black Jews of India.
Okay.
He argues that they...
Especially those groups without the Pentateuch as we know it.
Yeah, particularly those without the Pentateuch. Could represent a pre-Mosaic form of Judaism.
Okay.
Meaning that those beliefs and practices existed and evolved in India
Right.
before the traditional time frame for giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai.
That's a huge claim.
Is a bold claim.
Is there any evidence besides just like their lack of the Pentateuch to back that up?
Well, Higgins, he really relies heavily on linguistic connections and shared cultural practices.
Right.
But he admits that more research is needed.
Right.
He sees these groups as this, like, crucial missing piece of the puzzle,
Yeah.
potentially holding the key to understanding, the development of these early Jewish beliefs.
Right.
Imagine if we could trace those beliefs all the way back to their roots in India,
Right.
how that would change our understanding of Judaism.
It's mind-boggling to think about.
It really is.
It challenges us to rethink everything we thought we knew.
Right.
And just be open to these other narratives.
It does, and it makes you wonder if the black Jews represent this early branch of Judaism. How does that change how we think about the Samaritans?
Yeah, they're often seen as like a separate group. Right.
Right. The Samaritans are typically viewed as a distinct religious group,
Right.
separate from mainstream Judaism.
Right.
But Higgins, he throws another curveball.
Okay.
He argues that they actually represent a branch of the ancient Israelites
Okay.
who just maintained different religious practices
Okay.
centered around Mount Gerizim instead of Jerusalem.
So not a totally separate group, but a variation within that broader spectrum of Israelite belief.
Precisely.
Okay.
Higgins suggests that this whole idea of the lost tribes of Israel
Right.
might be a misinterpretation instead of disappearing.
Right.
These tribes may have been absorbed into other groups
Okay.
or developed their own distinct practices over time,
Right.
much like the Samaritans.
So he's looking at this big picture, this
Right.
whole tapestry of ancient beliefs and practices,
Yeah.
and he's seeing these connections that other people have missed.
That is a fantastic way to summarize his approach.
Yeah.
He's not focusing on these individual threads,
Right.
but on how they all weave together to form this complex, interconnected whole.
Right.
And this holistic perspective really challenges us
Yeah.
to reconsider how we even approach studying religion and history.
Okay, so we've covered so much ground exploring Higgins's ideas from India to the Middle East, linguistic links, challenging traditional narratives, all this stuff. But as we wrap up our deep dive here, what's the big takeaway? What does it all mean for how we understand the Jewish Pentateuch?
Well, ultimately, Higgins argues that the Pentateuch and the whole religious system,
Yeah.
it represents, it didn't just appear out of nowhere.
Right.
He sees it as part of this larger interconnected web of ancient wisdom and belief that's stretched across continents. And he's suggesting that over time, this system became kind of fragmented and distorted,
Right.
leading to all these diverse religious traditions we see today.
So instead of like this single divinely revealed text,
Right.
he's proposing that the Pentateuch evolved.
Yes, through this process of cultural exchange, synthesis and evolution.
So he's not denying divine inspiration,
No, not necessarily.
but suggesting that it maybe worked through human hands.
Right, incorporating elements from different cultures and beliefs.
And one example he uses is the concept of the Trinity.
The Trinity, yes.
It's not unique to Christianity or Judaism, right?
Exactly. Versions of the Trinity appear in many ancient religions, including Hinduism.
That's a good point. We often think of the Trinity as this distinctly Christian thing.
Right?
But if it's found in other traditions, it points to a much older, more universal origin.
Precisely. And for Higgins, this is key evidence, supporting his idea of this shared foundation for many religious beliefs. He sees these echoes and recurring themes
Right.
as remnants of this like primordial religious system, a kind of proto-religion from which these various traditions branched out.
It makes you wonder, what were the core beliefs of this ancient system? What kind of worldview did it represent?
That's a question Higgins wrestles with throughout Anacalypsis.
Right.
He doesn't claim to have all the answers,
Right.
but he really encourages us to look for clues in the shared symbols, myths, and rituals
Right.
that we find across different cultures.
It's like we're all archaeological detectives
Exactly.
piecing together these fragments of a lost world of belief.
It's a challenge, but it's exciting.
It is. Imagine if we could uncover the roots of human spirituality, trace those threads back to their origin.
Yeah.
It would completely revolutionize how we understand religion and history.
And it challenges us to rethink, our assumptions about religious truth.
Right.
If so many traditions share common elements, does that mean they all contain some kernel of truth? Does it suggest this deeper, more universal spiritual reality that transcends cultural boundaries?
Right.
These are questions Higgins really grapples with.
It's a lot to think about, but it's incredibly thought-provoking.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to new possibilities, seeing connections I never even considered before.
That's the power of Higgins' work.
Yeah.
It can be disruptive and unsettling.
Right.
But ultimately, it expands our understanding of the world and our place in it.
Right.
He encourages us to question everything, to look for those alternative perspectives, and be open to the possibility that there's so much more to history and religion than what we've been taught.
His ideas are definitely controversial.
Oh, yeah.
But there's value in that.
Absolutely.
He pushes us to think critically,
Good.
to dig deeper,
Yeah.
and to challenge the narratives that we've inherited.
And that's what makes Anacalypsis so fascinating and enduring.
Right.
It's not just about, the origins of the Jewish Pentateuch,
Right.
but the nature of knowledge itself,
Right.
belief, and this search for meaning.
Yeah.
Higgins is urging us to become active participants in this quest for understanding, to never stop questioning, exploring, and connecting the dots.
What a great way to wrap up our deep dive. It's been quite a journey.
It has.
Full of surprises, challenges, and profound insights.
Absolutely.
So to our listener, we leave you with this. What resonates most with you from Higgins's ideas? What new questions has this deep dive sparked for you? And remember, the exploration doesn't end here. It's just the beginning.